Thank you very much, Andrew. It is great to be here. I'd like to thank CMU for the privilege of being part of this illustrious group and of the long tradition of distinguished alumni. I consider myself to be humbled to be part of that because many people have had such incredible impacts on the world, and I'm just a teacher. I think about Ephesians chapter 4. Even Paul said of spiritual gifts, some are given apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds, and finally in the back of the bus, teachers. So I'm thankful for the privilege of being here. I'm also thankful for Karen, my wife and journeying partner for 31 years, especially for her nominating me under all those pseudonyms. And she also and our 3 adult children were profoundly challenged as I came home, and over the last decade and a half I've done most of my marking around the kitchen table, and being a verbal processor I would share with them endless incoherent sentences and things that made no biblical sense, like Jacob marrying Rahab and so on, sort of like a Leonard Cohen song without any redeeming musical value. Anyway, as I was thinking about what in my career might be worthy of this special recognition, I thought initially it might be because of longevity and commitment. I'm now in my 27th year of teaching at Columbia Bible College, and I spent 3 years earlier in a big public high school where I actually learned how to teach. But in my family, 27 years of serving in the same place is hardly even worthy of mention. My older brother spent 33 years teaching law at the University of Manitoba. My younger brother is in his 36th year working for the city of Lethbridge. My older sister, one of them, is just retired after 35 years teaching grade 3 in Red Deer Public School District. Another sister is in her 29th year at Parks Canada here in Winnipeg. Needless to say, longevity and commitment are sort of expected in our family. It was probably something in the water in Coaldale, Alberta that they added. And it appears that Sheila Clausen-Weeb is one of your faculty who's been here a long time, was drinking that same water. So I'll go back to the beginning about why I ended up doing what I've been privileged to do over these years at Columbia. After high school, I had no intention of becoming a teacher or professor, but every intention of becoming an engineer or a lawyer to make the most of my mathematical and or critical thinking skills and becoming financially successful. But first I would attend MBBC for 1 year. I had grown up in a family who valued education since my parents both had to stop out of public school in grade 8. However, both of them later went to Bible school and instilled in us the significance of this sort of education. So MBBC was meant to be a 1-year experience where I could also transfer some of the courses to the next level of career preparation. However, my time at MBBC was transformative. I was interested in pursuing a career, but I was challenged to have a calling. I was interested in making money in a career with prestige, but I was challenged to become a servant of Jesus and seek first his kingdom, regardless of the cost. I thought of the church as being somewhat irrelevant to my life, but I was challenged to see it as God's transformative community, living out his radical kingdom vision in the world. Needless to say, my 1-year plan turned into 4. My vision of it being an engineer or a lawyer was shelved, not because these are not worthy kingdom callings, because they did not reflect the deepest yearnings of my own life. As Parker Palmer would say, they did not emerge out of listening to my own life. I observed the variety of gifted teachers at MBBC, University of Winnipeg, and CMBC in the days when we used to share some courses together. I discovered that gifted teachers could not simply educate me, but they could inspire me to see the world in new ways. They could energize me to commit my life to significant causes, particularly the larger mission of God in the world, and assist me to have the critical thinking skills to process the dizzying world that I faced. And I'm also thankful to Bill Berg, who's here today, who let me into the choir, which is nothing short of a miracle of God's grace. So I'm going to come clean both to him and to George Weep, who's here. If there was some wrong notes in the bass section, it was probably me during Bach's Mass in B minor or Handel's Messiah, which I recall both of which we did together. So today I look back, though, with nothing but thanks for the models who taught me about the importance of teaching for human transformation, for the teachers who pushed me toward excellence without compromise, and for those who created atmospheres of encouragement and human relationship, without which we might as well close schools like this and replace them with nothing but online education. So after completing that joint bachelor degrees at MBBC and University of Winnipeg, I received a Bachelor of Education, some high school teaching, and more education to prepare me for what I do now at Columbia Bible College. I've been in school as either a student or a teacher for the past 50 years, from 1967, the centennial year, to today. From the moment I started teaching, I believe that I've discovered my calling for which I was created. I can hardly imagine any other life for me, and I'm deeply grateful to God for the privilege of being able to do work in the area of deepest joy. However, in case you think that one's calling is a place only of joy, teaching has also been endless work for me and much lost sleep. Countless times waking up at 3 or 4 a.m. and suddenly thinking about how I could improve the day's learning plan, and my mind spinning with visual images and realizing that any chance of sleeping any longer that night was out of the question. I'm not sure that I understood when I started that I would spend thousands over thousands of hours marking papers and exams trying to figure out the balance between justice and mercy. And in all of it, believing that this sacrificial work was somehow an act of love if it pushed students toward being equipped well for the challenge of their own kingdom calling. So for the last 26 years of teaching at Columbia, my teaching load has been heavily with first-year students, and which no one else seems to want to teach. And my understanding of my mission has been to encourage believers to become informed and engaged disciples of King Jesus, participating in God's transformational work in the world. In addition, I've seen my mission to help students become critical thinking, lifelong learners. So to say it simply, believers to disciples and students to lifelong learners. That has been a personal mission that I've seen as worthy of my life calling. One of the classes I was asked to teach in my first year is called Old Testament Survey, the title of which doesn't elicit joy and anticipation from first-year students, as you can well imagine. I have taken that as a personal challenge, and I have taught this course about 90 times. While many people wonder how someone can teach the same course so many times, I recall the wise words of a teaching professor of mine once who said that teachers don't teach subjects. They teach students. And I have taught 90, or I've engaged, hopefully 90 different groups of students over these years, so it never really has been the same course twice. So back to Old Testament Survey. In my first year, I followed the traditional way of teaching Old Testament Survey, a section by section and book by book overview of key content and themes. We started with Genesis with great excitement, moved on to Exodus with less excitement, and worked our way through the entire Old Testament of 39 books until it felt like we were wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. So the next year, I decided to introduce a short 3-class overview of the Old Testament story before I began to do the book-by-book thing. After completing those 3 classes, I came to realize that it's exactly the transformative power of narrative, or should I say meta-narrative, that invites someone to enter in and experience the Old Testament. The Bible is actually a story, and we shouldn't kill it. Sorry for the non-Anabaptist metaphor. By breaking it up into a collection of key concepts and themes. So that 3-class experiment became a journey to teach Old Testament Survey primarily through a larger 13-stage meta-narrative centered upon God's larger shalom restoration story, which continues through the New Testament, and I believe is the story that God is calling us to participate in today. So the Old Testament and the New Testament tell a big story, a story of shalom, disappointment, redemption, and hope, and God invites us to join that story. While I've tried to do justice to the necessary background questions, archaeology and geography, I have focused on this larger Old Testament story, which I believe has been key to any lasting contribution that I may have been able to make. Then about 8 years ago, I introduced something called a Shalom Project, which is a small student-based application activity where students would share in class. Students had the opportunity to participate in God's larger Shalom Restoration Project by encouraging a more positive relationship between them and God, them and other people, them and creation, or with themselves. It's been a privilege to hear students make courageous attempts to restore relationships and or make positive life decisions towards self-care or creation care. Shalom projects are now how we spend 5 or 10 minutes of each class beginning, and it feels like I get to stand on sacred ground as students enter in with their own lives towards God's larger Shalom restoration meta-narrative. I've often wondered why churches don't start each service with some sort of Shalom project. So my vocational life has not involved building any amazing bridges or buildings that will outlive me, nor does it include any significant contributions to the legal profession. Instead, it has involved me over and over walking into classes, hoping to facilitate transformative learning experiences for the purpose of encouraging believers to become disciples and students to become lifelong learners. It's been a vocational path that I've been privileged to participate in, even if it's significantly different than anything I ever expected. I'm thankful then for all the faculty over the years who have taught me, challenged me, mentored me, and modeled for me transformative educational experiences that helped me embrace my kingdom calling. I trust that CMU is and will always continue to do this for every student who walks down these hallways. And most of all, I'm thankful to King Jesus for whatever gifting I've been given and the incredible privilege of using those gifts in service to his larger mission in the world. I've been so blessed, and may his kingdom work of transformation continue in this place. Amen.